Week we looked at true courage with this account of David and Goliath, and we're going to look at true friendships. And what we picked up and what you were seeing was this contrast of true friendship with Jonathan, who says they were knit together, they loved one another, they were one. And it's contrasted with an unhealthy relationship with Saul. Jonathan, we see and we'll see, was driven by a love for David. And Saul was driven by a love for self, of jealousy, of wanting what David had. If you read this whole account, it ends in chapter 20, which we'll read the verse. It says that he fell on his face to the ground and he bowed 3 times, and they kissed one another and wept with one another, with David weeping the most. And so the whole account is bracketed by this love of Jonathan and David. Eugene Peterson put it this way. He says, friendship was bracketed and contained the evil. In the middle of these accounts of David and Jonathan is Saul trying to attack, Saul trying to destroy, Saul trying to bring down David. But friendship bracketed and contained the evil. It's a good picture of the all of Scriptures, where God created all things good. And we saw in Revelation chapter 22 at the end that he restores all things to good. So you had the creation and you had restoration. In the middle was the fall. There's brokenness. But I love how Peterson said that friendship bracketed and contained the evil. And as we go through hard and difficult things in life, what we need is friendship. We need other people. We need encouragement. We need people that will help us. Peterson said friendship forms. Friendship is a much underestimated aspect of spirituality. We talk about reading our Bible. We talk about prayer. What the Scriptures talk about a lot is being in community, having a relationship, being friends. Genesis 2 says it is not good for man to be alone. Acts 2 says that they were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to the prayers, and it says to the breaking of bread and the fellowship. They were devoted to one another. It's what we need. One of the most significant things we need in life, and particularly in the life of following Jesus, is just friends. To have friends and to be a friend. I was reflecting on this idea. So sometimes when you're preaching on something, you start maybe you're just more aware of it. But this week has been just a reminder of gratitude of the friends that God has given us. Since we moved, we were just talking about how long ago did you start the church? And we moved down here and we knew some family and we had a couple friends. And if we look over the last 7 or 8 years, God has established and brought tremendous friendships that we wouldn't be standing here today without them. In fact, my buddy Matt is here today. He's moving tomorrow. But when we moved down here, I didn't know any other pastors. I didn't know any church planters. I didn't know anybody. And Matt had planted a church in Palm Beach Gardens. And we connected, and he was a friend, and he was an encouragement. He's been that. We wouldn't be here without other people. We've gone through some tremendously difficult and hard things since we've moved here. What has sustained us, what has us standing here right now, are friendships, encouragements, helps. Even this weekend, I was just kind of taking note, we're just super grateful. We had people coming over to our house and dropping stuff off. Ashley and Karina were playing music on Friday night, and kids were out playing. And there was, hey, can I go with so-and-so? And can I go with so-and-so? Friendship is what we all need. It's what we desire for our kids. We've all had that, where kids maybe don't know anybody. They're not connected. They're a little lonely. You just want them to have friends, people around them. We need it. And so we need to ask, am I cultivating true and healthy friendships? Am I cultivating true and healthy relationships? And what we'll see in this passage, even with Saul, are what are unhealthy relationships that we need maybe just to have a little space from, to guard ourselves from. And this idea of friendship is becoming more and more rare. Ross Lester, he's a pastor out at Austin Stone in Austin, and he had a really helpful sermon on this. He talked about 50% Americans would say that no one knows them well. And you just stop and think about that. Nobody knows them well. 25% of Americans say that they have no one to turn to when they have a need. Have a need. It could be simple. It could be big. They don't have somebody to turn to. Talking to Chris during setup. He's like, hey, oh, it was awesome, man. Zach helped me move some stuff on Friday. Like, he had somebody to turn to. He had somebody to know. We all need friendships. Peterson talked about why this can be a challenge in our culture, in our life. He said, oftentimes, I think that we should have a quote. He says, we meet people, they size us up, make judgments, and begin calculating what they can get out of us. This is what happens. People are categorizing us. And he says, in so doing, they treat us as something less than what we think we are. And if we're in constant association with them, we actually become less. We live in a transactional culture. What can I get out of this person? What can they do for me? Do I want to be friends with them? What do they have to offer? And people, we meet them and they see us, and it's just like a thing that happens in their brain. Those are unhealthy relationships, unhealthy friendships. And then he says, so that's bad news. The good news is, he says, and then someone enters our life who isn't looking for someone to use. That's amazing. They're leisurely enough to find out what's really going on in us. Who are you? What are you passionate about? What drives you? What scares you? That takes time. It's taken 7-8 years, I feel like, people really know us. They're secure enough to not exploit our weaknesses or attack our strengths. Recognizes our inner life and understands the difficulty of living out our inner convictions, confirms what's deepest within us. They are a friend. And that is what we all need. We need people who love us for us, who know us, who encourage us, who help us, who build us up. I'm glad the students are here this morning. That's what you need. You need people who are for you. I hear all the chatter. Like, what's the number one thing that kids like to do to one another, and adults aren't much better? To tear one another down. Wait for something bad to happen. How can we be people who build people up? And a couple quick notes before we dive in. One, I thought this was, I'm sure I read this, maybe I didn't, I don't know. Jonathan and David are very different. I think I always had the picture like of the Sunday school stuff where it's like two buddies running through a field. Do you guys see those Sunday school pictures, right? Jonathan was like 30 years older than David. They weren't in the same age. Jonathan was much, much older. He was like a sergeant in the army. David wasn't even old enough to be in the army. So Jonathan was much older. They were from different classes. Jonathan was the king's son. David was like a peasant. He was a shepherd boy. They were the farmers. They weren't the same at all. They were very different. But in another sense, they were both the same. The foundation of both their lives, what motivated them, was who God was. David says he's a man after God's own heart. That over and over in this passage, and particularly in chapter 18, it was that God was with him, God was with him, God was with him. We saw it if you go back and read about Jonathan chapter 14, it talks about that he did everything in the name of the Lord. They had this one thing that brought them together, and it's what allowed them to be the type of friends they were to one another. It was their relationship with God, their understanding of him. As I was preparing for this, one of the greatest friendships and relationships that we have had since moving here is with Larry and Mary Ellen. He's an elder at the church here. And I was friends with his son. And they made no commitment. They were moving up to Jupiter. Their son-in-law, Dingo, was here. They're like, hey, we're moving up there. Son-in-law, daughter, we're going to be there. And my son said, you're starting a church? And he's like, we'll come check it out. He didn't say he was going to be a part of it. He said, we will come and see. And what has developed over those last 7 or 8 years is one of the best friendships that I have. He's not just like a mentor or somebody else. He's a friend. And he displays these things that we need in a friend. And what we see in friends is that true friends love one another. They care about who that person is, what they're going through. True friends are committed to one another. And then what we'll see, too, is that true friendship is costly. And what we've experienced and what we all need is friends who love one another, who are committed to one another, and that are willing to put their life on the line for us. The first thing we see in this is that true friends actually love one another. They're affectionate of who we are. It says, as soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. It says that he loved him. Again, when I see people at the end of their lives, usually their number one regret is they didn't tell somebody that they loved them. They didn't communicate it. And what we see in Jonathan and David, and people get like super awkward about like what type of relationship it was. And biblically, it was just friendship. They showed each other they loved them, and they told one another they loved each other. True friends are affectionate of who we are. They don't try and make us somebody else. They help us become who we actually are. They appreciate who we are. Unhealthy relationships seek to compare. They make it about themselves. This is what we saw with Saul. It said that Saul was mad because it says that they ascribed to 10,000 and to me 1,000. He made it about himself. One commentator made a good point, is like, this is really, like, nobody ascribed anything to Jonathan. But Jonathan was celebrating David and who he was. He was thankful for who he was. It says that the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. And twice it says that he loved him as his own soul. It means that their lives were wrapped up together. They were so close. It's the same language that's used with Jacob, who lost his son Joseph. And the brothers were scared to bring him back. They're like, we can't come back without our brothers, because their souls are wrapped up together. Their lives are wrapped up together. There's this emotional connection. There was an intimacy that makes a lot of people feel awkward in their friendship. At the end of the account in chapter 20, verse 41, I think it should be on the screen, they were going to be separated and not be together anymore. And it says that they fell on his face to the ground and they bowed 3 times. And it says they kissed one another and wept with one another, David weeping the most. The thought of not being together brought them to tears. And in this greeting, this where it says they kissed one another and wept with one another, it was reserved for extraordinary greetings or farewells between family members. It's the type of emotion if you've ever had to leave family or you had to move somewhere. When we were moving down to Florida, my nephews, I just saw one of them. It's their 19th birthday, and the other one is 21. And my nephew Jack was probably about 3 or 4. We had moved down here, and so my sister, she's healthy now, but she has diagnosed with breast cancer like a month later. So my mom's like, hey, can you just come back home? So I went back home for the weekend, and we went and got the boys' bunk bed just to do something. They hadn't left the house. They hadn't done anything. And they brought me, I'll cry, sorry. I guess that's okay if I'm talking about being emotional. That's okay. So they drive me to the airport, and my little nephew, who's 3 or 4 at the time, he goes, Uncle B, can we dunk tape our arms together so we never have to be apart? And I'm just like weeping. That's what's going on here. The thought of not being together. Why? Because they're emotionally connected. They love one another. They care for one another. They're for one another. Thankfully, Jack's 21 now, and we're still close. We're still tight. Their affection for one another. One of the passages that drives Karina and I, even in starting this church, is 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. It says, we were gentle among you. This is the Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul is like, if you just read about him, he is like a strong person, right? He's not soft in any way. It says, we were gentle among you, like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. And he says, so being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, that's his role as an apostle, but also our very own selves, because you had become very dear to us. There was an affection, there was a desire, there was love for one another. And that's what all people need. That's what we all need. We all need people, and we need to become people who are affectionately desirous of others. We need people who are dear to us. It takes time. It takes sacrifice, but that's what we were made for. True friends love one another. They're for one another. The second thing we think, and I just said that it takes time, true friends are committed to one another. We need friends who are committed to our good. Verse 2 and 3 says, "And Saul took him that day and would not let him return to his father's house." It says, "Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul." One thing we see in unhealthy relationships is they seek to control other people. If you read here, it says that Saul would not let David go home. He wanted to control him. He wanted to manipulate him. He was after his own good. He sends him out to the front lines. He sends him out to battle. Unhealthy relationships limit us. They're not seeking our good, our flourishing. But true friends are committed to our good. Verse 3 uses that word covenant. It means hesed. It means kindness. It means to have a love and a compassion with a sense of loyalty and faithfulness. It's a commitment of love and compassion that has loyalty and faithfulness. It's a steadfast love. And one commentator pulled out, if you read through chapters 18 through 20, all the people who are committed to David. And as tensions rose and Saul seeks to control him and ultimately kill him, you see all these people who are committed to David. You had Saul's own kids, Jonathan and Michal, who he ended up marrying, Samuel, Abimelech, the kings of Moab and Gab. All these people were committed to David. We need people who are committed to us. And we need to be committed to other people. We need people who are with us through thick and thin, who don't seek to manipulate or control us. Kids, this is what's going on when you're trying to play video games, right? And you want to play with other kids and they won't let you play. And they're like, dude, we're playing squads. This is a tournament, right? What? You're not good enough. They're just trying to use you. And then when they don't have anybody to play with, what happens? Dude, can you get on? Can we play? Come on. Well, what happened when I wanted to play and you wouldn't let me? Or when you're out at lunch and they don't let you sit with them? Or if you do this, then you can sit with us. Right? It's all manipulating. It's all control. We need people who are committed to one another through thick and thin. The third thing we see is that true friendship is costly. It takes sacrifice. We need people who are willing to risk. It's about what we can give. Unhealthy relationships are all about what you can gain. If you look at verse 4 and 5, it says, "And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. So that Saul set him over the men of war, and this was good in the sight of all the people, and also in the sight of Saul's servant." What's going on here is Jonathan is sacrificing for David. Jonathan was this king's son. You know what he was supposed to become? The king. What did God say? You're not going to be the king. David's going to be the king. So what does Jonathan do? Gives him the robe. Gives him the bow. Gives him the spear. He stripped his robe and he gave it to David. Jonathan gave it all up for the good of David. And what we see throughout the passage, if you look at even chapter 19, verse 4, Jonathan stood by David's side and stood up to his own father. His father wanted to kill David. What does Jonathan do? He risked everything for David's good. He risked his relationships. He risked his future. He risked his life for the good of his friend. He would lose everything. His own dad tried to kill him. True friendship is costly. I take a look around and I see who are the most kind of like relational, healthiest people I know. They're the ones that sacrifice the most. They're willing to sacrifice their agenda, their schedule, their money, their resources for the good of other people. It's costly. We had one of the kids had a little brush up with an older kid, and there was two friends there. One was more Christian than the other, and that kid just kind of stood back, let it go on. Other kid who was smaller, less Christian, jumped in, stood up with them. Then they had to go face the authority, the coaches and all that stuff. One kid, man, I'm not really sure what happened. Like, right, left it, hung him out to dry. Other kid, no, that's not what happened. This is what happened. He risked for him. He put it on the line for him. He knew he would get in trouble if he was a part of any of it. But he stepped in. The true friend steps in. Still closer with that one, as you should be. True friendship is costly. It takes sacrifice. You have to be willing to risk. And that's what we see in Jonathan and David. And so what we need, guys, we need more people to love us, to be committed to us, to sacrifice for us. And that happens when we can love others, when we are committed to them, and we sacrifice for their good. And what we've been doing in this story of David is, how does this all point us to Jesus? And the good news of the scriptures, it says that Jesus is our true friend. And when we understand that Jesus is our friend, it empowers us, it compels us, it gives us the ability to be the kind of friends we need to be. I'll come back to this, but I love how the Message frames John 15. It says that we should love one another the way I loved you. This is the very best way to love. He says, put your life on the line for your friends. You are my friends. In Christ, we see that Jesus loves us not for us. He doesn't love us for what we've done. He doesn't love us because what he can gain. He loves us because he loves us. That's it. He wants what's best for us. Romans 5 says that for while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. He says, for one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person, one dare even die. But God shows his love for us, that while we were sinners, Christ died for us. Christ didn't love us or doesn't love us or become our friends because of anything that we can give, anything that we can offer, anything that he gains. He loves us for who we are. He is affectionate of us. He loves us. As we look at the gospel, we know Jesus is committed to us. He's committed to us to the end. John 13 says, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. Jesus knew his hour to sacrifice himself had come. And it says, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. It wasn't just to the end of the life. It says that it means that he loved them completely. He loved them fully. He was fully committed to our good. He gave us everything we needed. And then after he says that, it says that he takes on the role of a servant and he begins to wash their feet. Jesus is committed to us. He is committed to what's best for us. He says he will never leave us or forsake us. And finally, Jesus is our true friend who loves us and laid down his life for us. He put his life on the line for us on the cross, literally. Love one another the way I have loved you. This is the very best way to love. Put your life on the line for your friends. You are my friend. When we know that Jesus loves us, when he's committed to us, when he's laid everything out on the line for us, we then become the type of people who can love others, who can be committed to others, who can be a true friend, who lays down their life for others. And so we look to Jesus. And as we do, we need to ask, what does it look like for you to be a friend like him? My hope is that we dwell on those ways that Jesus has loved us. Dwell on those ways Jesus is committed to us. Dwell on those ways that Jesus calls us friend. And then as we dwell on those, as we behold him, we become more like him. And this kind of goes back to the top two. This is the call for the church. This is what we're supposed to be for one another. And so we need to ask, how can we engage with the church in a way that we have friends who are seeking to follow Jesus, who are helping us to follow Jesus? One of my favorite parts about becoming a Christian was I finally started hanging out with people who weren't like me. It's way more interesting. It's way more fascinating. The church is the place where we're connected to one another, where we have people who are committed to one another, where we see people who are laying down their lives for one another. I mean, I pray that this is encouraging and helpful for you. This has been probably one of the most encouraging and helpful texts for me to study, because it's just opened my eyes to see all the ways that God has, is, and will do this. He's building his church. He's establishing his church.